right. It is Wednesday, 7 p.m., and you all know what that means. The next Think Founder Talk is about to go down. In case you're wondering who's this new face I'm looking at right now, my name is Nicholas. This will be my first moderation today, so I am very excited, very nervous as well. I know Nina and Felix have set the bar very high for me these last couple of weeks, but I'm sure we'll have some fun. We have some great content in store for you. Our guest is Isabel Gonzalez. She is the founder and CEO of Klaud9, a company based in Singapore. First things first, Isabel, thank you so much for doing this, and I hope you're doing great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on board. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
being able to, sort of to share some information on what it's like to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
We think sometimes it's easy, but it's very challenging.
I could imagine.
A lot of headache. So so if you're fine with, I'll introduce myself quickly, and then I'll introduce the company to you, so what we do. And then I would say we go into, a few, I've presented just a few slides about, sort of what's important for, sort of the real estate life, I would say, or entrepreneurs. And,
Isabel,
and then we go into...
one thing before you start off, as always, post your questions into the chat. And later in the Q&A, I'll pick them out and ask Isabel everything you need to know. Bring the energy, be active. And yeah, that's all from me. I'll sit back. I'll let you take over. So Isabel, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'd like to introduce myself just quickly. Well, as you've heard, my name is Isabel. I'm originally from Spain. And I've been traveling, or I've been living in nearly 5 countries. So I've lived in Barcelona, I've lived in London for 4 years, then I moved over to Sydney as well as a sales and marketing director for a company there, travel at that time. I've lived also in Germany, in Darmstadt, and I've lived over 11 years in Singapore. So I've been traveling quite a bit, sort of mainly for work, always, sort of taking up different positions. My background is originally marketing. And it's been a big transformation from when marketing started off as offline marketing, very simple, and now it's just all online and digital and very, data driven. So how did I become an entrepreneur? It's a little bit, sort of a fun story, because I started off, obviously I've been in corporate life for many years, for over 15 years in the different countries. So it's a comfortable life, I'd say, to be in corporate, because you specialize in, you specialize really in a very, sort of in a very specialized department. You're either marketing, or your finance, or your sort of, or your management, or something else. But when it comes to sort of becoming an entrepreneur, it becomes very challenging, because you start doing absolutely everything. So I decided to jump into the cold water one day, and I think in some of the questions and answers there might be sort of some questions as well. But I decided one day I would try it, because I had accumulated enough knowledge, and I thought, why not? So it's been a rough time. I won't lie to you, especially going through COVID and a lot of pivoting and everything else. But I'll tell you a little bit more sort of afterwards. Let me share some information with you on sort of who we are and what we're doing, so that you understand a little bit sort of better sort of about us. So can you, you should be able to see my my screen now. So how did we start off, you know, sort of in creating Klaud9 is originally because my background is marketing, and I was living, you know, sort of in Singapore. We found that, you know, sort of when we had to create, you know, sort of digital marketing campaigns or any online marketing campaigns or social media, that it was very hard for us to find local content. And local content means, you know, sort of photos, stock photos with Asian people. And the reason behind it is, well, why, you know, sort of in the US and in Europe, you know, stock photography, the likes of Shutterstock and Getty, they've been around for over 20 years. So there are millions of photos being uploaded to those platforms. Asia has always been very far behind because Asia had never been booming up until, you know, suddenly in the last, you know, sort of 5 to 10 years that Asia started booming. And then we thought, you know, there is an opportunity there, because the global brands moving from Europe and from the US into Asia did not find any, you know, sort of Asian stock photos. So that's how we started originally in 2017 with an Asian stock photo platform. And then we found that our main challenge. So normally, what happens when you start when you launch a startup is that many times you do research. You know, sort of you know, sort of you have case studies, you do research and everything, but suddenly you launch the website. And when suddenly something happens, which is unforeseen normally, and it can be sometimes the customers where you think we should have now lots of customers, or it can be the supplier side as well. So in our case, we had a lot of demand from the customer side, but we had a problem with the supply side. So the supply side are our photographers, and they had to upload Asian stock photos to the platform. What was happening is that they were not used to create, you know, sort of stock photos themselves. While in the US and Europe, there is actually it's actually a job, a full-time job, to be a stock photographer and upload those photos onto multiple, you know, sort of stock photo platforms, which is not the case in Asia. So Asia is very much behind in that sense. And photographers were used to just custom photo shoots, which means you call them, you know, sort of you engage them for, you know, 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever, and then they get paid, and that's it, end of the story. So yeah, so our main challenge was, you know, we launched the website, we get a lot of global brands and customers on board, but not enough content. So, and we were not going to be able to wait around and wait for the photographers to get used to a new way of working, of pre-producing stock photos, because as a startup, you just don't have the time and you don't have the money. So what we did then is, you know, sort of when we saw what was happening, we pivoted. And we pivoted then in 2018. So pivoting means you have to start from scratch, you know, sort of redesigning and coding the website again. And we saw that there was a lot of demand then for custom photos and videos as well. So we decided then to, you know, start from scratch again, which was very painful. But start from scratch again, and we lost, you know, a lot of months of, you know, sort of development. And launched then 2018 then with a custom, you know, photo shoot platform, which targets, you know, sort of, and you'll see our target market in a second, but I'll take you through it now. So if this allows me, yeah. So what we found is a little bit that, you know, sort of obviously with the explosion of social media and e-commerce and digital marketing, that everyone needs photos. And that can be, as I said, you know, if you upload, you know, a product onto Amazon, you need a photo. If you share, you know, sort of anything on Instagram, you need a photo. If you know, sort of want to have a website, you need a photo. So that's where we saw the massive opportunity for us, you know, to create then low-cost photo shoots for any business in the world. So the brands that, so that the challenges that brands were facing, and that's a little bit, the research that we did, is that it's always been a very much, sector very much offline, where you have to do a lot of manual search. It was very expensive. The planning and the execution used to be like 2 to 3 months. They used to have to, source separately models, stylists, and so on. And it was very much, sort of a very manual, sort of work. So what we thought then, we want to be able, especially with the demands of social media and websites. So nowadays, when offline brands, let's say Coca-Cola or Unilever or any offline brand, their time of reaction has to be so much faster in getting products out and getting campaigns out than it used to be when there was just offline marketing, obviously, because you would just launch maybe once or twice a year, you do a big photo shoot and that was it. But now you have to be able to produce content really, really fast. So that's where we come in then, sort of with the tech platform. Then what we do then is, we match the photographers with the right brand. So the opportunity there is, on one hand, for the brands to be able to do, custom photo shoots within 24 hours anywhere in the world at a lower cost. And on the other hand, we give jobs to photographers who would not have access to brands like Google or Visa or Nivea or anyone else, because they're unknown. And normally those type of brands, they don't tend to onboard those photographers, sort of individually. It's just too painful for them. They rather work with a platform or with an online, or with an advertising agency that can give them services, worldwide, ideally. So when we launched, as I said, we launched in 2018. We started off in Singapore, then we started shooting across the region. Now, sort of we shoot also in Australia, so APAC wide. And we went then into Spain because I am originally from Spain, so we saw a big potential here as well. And we've been shooting, sort of now, in the US now as well. So yeah, so globally. So the reason why clients then started to choose us, so what is really important is that you're clear on what your clients want, or what can you offer your clients, or the pain points of your clients. I think that is sometimes really hard to put your, sort of your finger on it, because you could have a lot of different segments, and every segment, like in our case, is like, we had to learn on the job as well. So we have different segments, like, for example, premium segment, which is the advertising and global agencies. Their pain points are different from an SME, which is a smaller company, or from a startup, or from a B2C, B2B platform. So you have to identify the personas within, each of your segments, and then find out the pain points that each of them has. And the communication has to be personalized, the way you communicate to each of those segments. So that is something that you really need to be really clear on. So the main reason why, any of these, sort of businesses, choose to work with us is because the turnaround time is fairly quick, 24 hours, you have photos and custom. You can save a lot of money in production. We use, AI and machine vision for, so to speeding up, the way we source photographers. We offer to B2C, B2B platforms an API integration or white label, which allows them to distribute our photo shoots to their customers. And then we obviously, have the online booking, and the usage rights, which is really important, is worldwide, all media in perpetuity. So as I said, sort of we work with different segments, and you have to be very clear on how you communicate to them what the pain points are of each of them, and then try and work, sort of on those pain points with them. And by now, so we work a lot with Google, we work with, Unilever, we work with, all sorts of different brands, CocaCola, across the world. So we're just quite good. I would say when it comes to marketing, like I come normally from B2C, it's more exciting than B2B. So B2B marketing can be sometimes a sort of very much I'd say a bit more boring, because you depend a lot on mailings, on scraping. We use scraping tools where we scrape LinkedIn, and then we import those, sort of contacts into HubSpot. We do a lot of mailings. Then you have to create a lot of content. So it's all about SEO. It's all about lead generation. So we'll work a little bit different, sort of than the purely B2C, where you just, sort of put on, you have a lot of money put into social media and into PPC, for example, campaigns, and then you just launch, you invest a lot of money, and that's it. With, sort of B2B, it works sort of, fairly different as well. So you have to create relationships, sort of with those customers. So what we offer as services is from, sort of photo shoots over to 360 virtual tours. We do also crowdsource and user-generated content. And the reason why we had to do that as well, so it's always looking at new products that you can offer to your clients as well. So if you see that when you first launch, you launch with one product, but then you see that, suddenly their demands, change. So you have to constantly look at, sort of what type of new products, can you offer. And the same, sort of for videography, then suddenly from photos, they start saying to you, hey, can you, can you give us videos, or can you, offer different types of services such as, stylists or makeup and so on. So this is just, a few sample of photos so that you understand, what we then produce. So we don't produce ourselves. It's the freelance photographers that we work with, whether it's in Spain, in Singapore, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, sort of in the US, anywhere in the world, that we, source, we vet. They have to apply to become a photographer, sort of a contributor to us, and then we send them projects which they then, accept. So this is, for example, CocaCola. Shot, the regional head office is sitting in Singapore, but during COVID, they were not allowed to travel, and everyone was under lockdown. So we had to go into Bali actually to create those photos. So everything was done remotely. Work with Unilever. We work across, different sectors like property and so on. So we work across, a lot of different industries, from beauty over to property, FMCG, everything else. Now, when it comes to entrepreneurs, so I think, sort of what is important to know, and that is something that you have to know, and that can happen, anytime. 90% of the startups fail. And that is, that's reality, and that's a statistic that is, you'll find everywhere. And there can be a lot of reasons behind it. So one of the, I'd say 2 main reasons: you run out of money. So that is a big problem, because it can happen anytime. So even if you keep on, raising funds, even if you go through round A, B, C, D, E, if suddenly, you don't find investors that want to invest, more money even, and your burn rate is so high, eventually you can go down. So it doesn't matter at which level you are, until you're profitable, and then until you don't need any more investment, you can always constantly, sort of run out of money and you go down. But especially in the when it comes before you move to round A, so this is the early stage, sort of startups that we're talking about mainly. 90%, sort of fail, and that can be due to, as I said, running out of money. Team. The team is really important, so that a lot of, teams actually start arguing. They don't, they don't get on well anymore, sort of they have different opinions and so on. So that is, sort of, that is another one. And then obviously, product, or you don't have enough sales. So therefore, because you don't have enough sales or you don't have enough users, you don't get, sort of investment. And because you don't get investment, you die. So it's a big thing. It's one of the biggest headaches that you'll have as an entrepreneur, to that extent that you can't sleep at night. I mean, that's, how tough it gets sometimes, especially now during, sort of COVID, a lot of, different sectors like in travel, events, restaurants. So a lot of sectors have been affected, and a lot of startups were in all these sectors that have been affected really badly by COVID. So some of them pivoted and have been able to pivot successfully. The ones that have not been able to pivot, sort of they, might had to close down, or they put the company on hold, or try to survive somehow. If you raised funds before COVID, then great, because you have a buffer there, sort of that you can work with. If you didn't and you try to raise funds now, with your sales having gone down, then it becomes, a real issue. So it's not an easy path, So early stage startups. So when you first, sort of start, raising funds, you normally go to business angels and you invest, and they invest mainly in the team and in the idea. So they invest in you as a person. They invest in you as a person because you convince them about, your idea. You convince them that you're the right team to execute, sort of that you're able to, sort of develop, sort of the idea and then actually execute, because it's good to have an idea, and, a PowerPoint presentation is always awesome, but the next step is then the execution, how well you execute. Can you, sort of scale eventually as well? But, sort of at the beginning, business angels, and you can even find them on LinkedIn if you, do a sourcing, if you do, sort of some searches, and they actually put, in the titles, business angels. So you can even contact them directly. Normally you'll find also in different countries the business angels, like a sort of clubs or, platforms and so on that you can apply to. And then the big ones, the well-known ones, which is like Keiretsu, which is, sort of global, and some of the others. So each country might have local ones, and then you have some global business angels, sort of clubs or associations, sort of that you can actually have access, and then you pitch to them. And then you also have the obviously the big events like South Summit, for example, or any other, big events where you can pitch. So they call them the pitch arenas. And that's where you can go in and, if someone sees you, if an investor sees you, because business angels tend to go to those type of events as well, and they like the idea and they like your pitch, they, sort of, they'll be able to contact you then. So yeah, so as I mentioned, pitch events, it's really important. Just go to apply to all the pitch events that there are in the whole of Europe, sort of worldwide. It doesn't matter where it is. It just gives you exposure. That's what I've been doing. So I was, there was a time where I was pitching nearly every month or every second month at any event, in the middle. I don't know, it could be, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in Asia, sometimes, and across Asia. But the fact is that, sort of when people see you, they understand what you're doing, they like what you're doing, so they'll contact you. And sometimes it can be maybe not necessarily for investment, but it could also be for business, where they say, hey, by the way, so it's actually a great idea, and I actually right now I need this service. So it's really good, sort of to, to see you. So, pitch wherever you can. It brings you great exposure to, as I said, investors as well as sort of potential business. So I'd say the most important part is the team, because at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, it's where, business angels, they invest in you. So your team can make you or break you, and that's, sort of that is the end of the story. So if you don't get the right people on board that believe in the same idea and that have the different skills, so you don't want, I don't know, 3 marketeers, on the same team. You normally, if you're a tech company, you want a founder that is a CTO, that is a developer. And you can call him CTO at the beginning, which is, if you start off, fresh off university, you wouldn't be at a CTO level because you don't have the experience. But you don't need a CTO at the CTO level when you start. You need a coder. You need a good coder. You need someone, who has a vision, someone, who needs how to code properly, who's fast, who can, and gets himself, familiarized with, what competitors are doing, or, the latest technology. But you really need, someone who codes. It's only at a later stage where you start scaling that you need really someone with more experience, a CTO, where says, okay, now there are different priorities, how we're going to scale into, multiple countries, or how we're going to scale into, different types of, technology or partners or anything else. Then what is important in a team as well is you need sales. So if you need sales, ideally you have a digital marketeer on board, or you have, someone from marketing or sales, on board, because you need to know, you need to target your customers. You need to get either users, or you need to get sales on board. So that is, the other, very important, position. In the third position, where sometimes there can be two people, or sometimes, even three. So, but at least, the two of them are important. Out of those two or three people that you have, in the team, there will always be one that does, focus on pitching to investors, and the majority of his or her time will be really on sourcing, investors, and that takes up a lot of time. So 75% of my time goes into talking to investors, and on top of it, unfortunately, instead of the investors making it easy for startups and not wasting our time into putting multiple documents together in different ways, in different formats, with different data, and if I think, every time I speak to an investor, I get different questions, similar questions, change the data, present the data in a different way, present the presentation in a different way, change your pitch. I think I've been, changing my pitch for like over 100 times. But it just takes a lot of your time away, and you really need someone who can, convince, the investors that, you're the right person, to be able to do the pitch and, get the money in. So yeah, so that is important. The next round, and I would say, if you start up, don't spend a lot of money on, on developing a platform, and don't spend a lot of time on it, because time is money at the end of the day. So if you can get something off the shelf, just to prove that there is a business opportunity there, you can even set it up in Wix or Shopify or any of those, off the shelf ones to start off with. If you just want to prove that there is a business opportunity there, once you you have that, because it's very different if you walk to someone with a PowerPoint presentation versus, even if it's in Shopify and Wix, I already have something working. It's not ideal, but at least, it's visual, it works, you can drive a bit of traffic, you can try out, and it doesn't cost you a lot of money and time to have that done. What is clear is that when you go to the next round, so not the round of the business angels, but when you go to the next round of, VC, venture capital investors, what they want is data, data, data. They want to know how much traffic you're driving, what's the conversion rate, how many, visitors come to your website, how many bookings do you get, which industries they are from, which segmentation, at which price point, whatever. So when you start then developing your own platform, you really need to make sure that your developer understands, and you have to, sit him down, and you need to give him right from the beginning all the data entry levels that you need. Because if you cannot, show any of the investors at the next stage, all that data, they just don't want to see anything else. That they want to see that, your traffic is going up, your users are going up, your sales are going up, and ideally they want to see this. They don't like to see, this, or they don't like to see no data at all. So that is really important that you have that in mind and that you build that in. If you start at a later point, it becomes very difficult. Once you have developed the platform, then suddenly you have no data. Do you know what the conversion rate is? Do you know at which price point? Do you know the average sort of a price or ticket price? And so on. So I really, honestly, it is a must. You need to have all the data ready. What do VCs like? And we learned it the hard way. Sort of being in Asia is very different, sort of than being in the US for certain sectors or in Europe. So, for example, in our sector, we're considered a sector in media or marketing. Now, there have been very little investors who've invested in our sector in Asia, so which makes it really, really hard for us, sort of to raise lots of funds, like versus the US, for example. So there are like the flavors of the month or the flavors of sort of the year. Suddenly all the VCs invest in, I don't know, in prop tech, or suddenly everyone is going into fintech, or the next one everyone's going to health tech. So there seems to be a bit of sort of and that's across all the different countries and regions. It's just that some countries or regions are more open to new ideas, and that's mainly the US. I mean, you come up with any new fresh idea in the US and you'll find many more investors sort of to go and to sign up for that. What do VCs like in general? They like SaaS models. So SaaS models means, like the typical of, sort of you go into Dropbox, you pay monthly subscription, and it's just done. So monthly recurring revenue, that's what they really like to see, because otherwise you go into a lot of, sort of, so what's the churn rate? They start asking you. So if it's, for example, I don't know, in online travel, right? I've been working for a lot of years, for many years in an online travel agency. So our churn rate was really high. That means churn rate is, so you have a customer, how long does the customer stay with you? How much have you invested in that customer? And, how long is it staying with you? In online travel, you don't have, sort of customers that stay with you normally, because it's just very much price driven. So it's like you go to Expedia because the flight is $20 cheaper, or you go to lastminute.com because the flight is $30 cheaper. So the churn rate is really, really high in certain sectors. So what VCs like to see is that you have either SaaS models, you have monthly recurring revenue, and that makes it sort of really attractive for them, because they know that if the cost of your customer is then very little, because it's recurring revenue, so that so you invest less in customer acquisition. Scalability, obviously, sort of how quick and sort of you can scale, that it's a scalable model, so you can launch it anywhere in the world. And ideally, sort of software. And I have to say, from my own experience as well, if you sort of depend on people, it makes it harder. If you just have software like the type of Dropbox or anything similar, where you sort of you do not depend on, I don't know, on people having to go into places, like, let's say, for example, in our case, photographers or videographers, and so during COVID, they could not work. We were depending on them being able to work, on customers, on businesses being able to give us jobs, and they could go out and shoot. So in that case, we were depending on people. So ideally, sort of you have, software, you have something that, you don't depend necessarily on people. But yeah, on monthly recurring revenue is always really important, or, sort of users. Adapt constantly. And I think you'll find that, like 99% of all startups, and that's even the big ones, they've pivoted, I don't know, probably between 2 and 5 times minimum. Because, you find on the way that suddenly something doesn't work, or that the customers want something else, or that you forgot, sort of, or something happened like COVID, and then it forces you to pivot, or it's constantly, sort of something changes. So the most important thing for you also not to die is that you constantly, sort of adapt to the situations as well. And the most important thing I would say is that you quickly, so that you see, you adapt, you see. So if you just keep on going to the same direction, like in our case, we could have done the same thing. We could have thought, oh, let's try and educate the photographers so that they start creating, sort of Asian stock photos, and we can upload them to the platform, and then we can sell, because there's a demand there from the client side. But we just didn't have the time. We didn't have the time. We don't have the money. So that's two things that startups don't have: time and money. Okay, so that's against you. So what you have to do is constantly, sort of pivot and see, analyze, and pivot, until suddenly, things work out right, and sort of and everything is easier then. So it's not a sprint. Pace yourself. Stay healthy mentally and physically, and I think that's really important, sort of, because we go into it and you spend sometimes so many hours, you get burned out, and that's even worse. So it is really important that you still take your time to, I don't know, to do exercise, or to yoga, or something that takes your mind off the business sometimes. I have an 8-year-old son, so which is good, because he keeps me sort of busy as well. So sometimes when things get too hard, or sort of, or we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because it does happen in many occasions. It's sometimes better to step away, or to step out and say, hey, I just need to go, I don't know, windsurfing, or I need to play with sort of like in my case, I go out with my son, or sort of I do exercise, or I play tennis, or I do whatever. But that is really, sort of very, very important, sort of that you bear that in mind. It's a marathon. It's a marathon, and it goes on and on and on. And then once you've raced the first, sort of round, it goes into racing the next round, and the next round, and the next round. And it doesn't mean because you have money that things get easier, because then you get into other types of problems. Then you have lots of money, then you have to structure the company, then you have to, sort of scale, then you have to do. So it's not an easy path. It's a fun path, I have to say, because you're creating something, sort of on your own. And if it works out and you earn lots of money, or you, sort of you sell, it's the best thing in the world. I mean, it's it's satisfying, but it's also it's a tough path. It's a tough journey, and even I'd say majority, even if you fail and you like it, if it's in your NDA, just keep on going, and then eventually so it'll work out. So yeah, so I hope I've been able to give you sort of a few ideas, a few thoughts there, and I think I can then move into sort of questions.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much. That was some great stuff, and a lot of very interesting topics. I'm sure we'll touch upon these later on. However, I would like to start by asking you, you studied in Barcelona, you've worked and traveled all around the world, cities like London, Frankfurt, Sydney. I'm curious, why did you choose Singapore, and what made it the best city to found your company in?
Well, I started in Singapore. Well, I was offered a position as a country manager for an online travel agency in Singapore. So I launched it in 2010 there. And, then once I was there, I saw the opportunity of, how Asia was, sort of developing in different ways, and it was starting to boom. So I would say Singapore, is not the best place, I have to say, to start off a startup. And the reason behind it is because it's very expensive. The salaries are very high. So what normally a lot of companies do as well now is they go into Malaysia, or they go into Vietnam or Thailand or other countries. They start off the business, and once sort of they become more successful, then they move into Singapore. Now I was already living there, and that's why we started. But yeah, it's you want to start a startup where the cost of living, the salaries are not so high, and where you get subsidies as well from the government. So there are a lot of subsidies around it. I would say, sort of bear that in mind when you launch a startup.
Okay, but you've managed to build up a very successful company anyway, and also expand into other countries. You've showed the slide earlier, so I guess Klaud9 is now a worldwide network. Could you tell us more about potential cultural differences between all of your markets, like Europe, like the US, like Asia, especially concerning how they conduct business, and with you coming from a marketing background, how do you approach customers, and how do you engage with your partners?
Yeah, I'd say the like sort of the way you conduct business in Singapore and Asia, like especially in Singapore, is very much about through WhatsApp. Like people message us through WhatsApp, for example. So today I received a message from one of sort of previous clients, and they say, hey, can I have a photo shoot? So you set up, sort of immediately a WhatsApp group, sort of, I don't know, with Google or CocaCola or whatever, and you conduct business or, coordination of shoots or whatever. So you use a lot of, mobile. You're always on the mobile, I'd say, in Asia. In Spain, sort of with mainly, I think it's the meetings or the calls, sort of that makes it, sort of happen. Where we've been, getting quite a bit of business. The US is harder because the US, like Europe and Asia, seems too far away for them. So if you do not have, a US-based team, or it says, or the website is very much, looks, sort of very American. So it becomes much harder to do business over there. I mean, we've managed to get, some clients over there. But I think, sort of we would definitely do better if we have, a local team there that has even an American accent, sort of, and everything comes across as very local. So yeah, because to them, like Europe or the US seems, Europe or Asia seems so far away.
Okay. It is kind of unique because the topic of the Asian startup scene isn't something that we really have insights to, and you do. So my question would be, can you tell us a little bit about Asian startups? How do they differ from European startups? Is there anything?
Mm-hmm. I'd say if we analyze a little bit the whole startup scene in the world, I'd say, sort of you normally find a lot of great, innovative and new ideas start always in the US. Then normally in sort of Europe and Asia, there's a lot of, copy and paste of many of those ideas. In Asia, tend, sort of far behind in, implementing those ideas. Just to give you an idea, cheap tickets, for example, when we launched in 2010 in Singapore, there were still a lot of, sort of people running to travel agencies. We launched together with Expedia and Skyscanner in 2010. And while, sort of Expedia had already been launched in 1996 in the US, and a unicorn Traveloka in Indonesia only launched in 2012. So it just shows that, sort of they're far behind. However, if, a business model works, because of the size of some of those countries, it's massive. They become, easily a unicorn as well, because some of those countries are just big. It's just massive. But yeah, now I'd say, sort of the same for China, right? And then I'd say Asia in that sense, the investment from an investment perspective, there's obviously the majority of the VCs, big VCs, there's a lot of money in the US, even in Europe, but I would say that's why a lot of companies, so even Spanish companies we've seen, or European companies, what they do is they set up an office in Delaware because of tax purposes, so Delaware in the US. And that way, sort of they have access to American VCs because they have bigger checks. There are more out there. They invest a lot in different, sort of sectors as well. And yeah, it's the networking, the sort of types of sort of people you can get there, but especially investment is I would say, if I compare US to Asia, is by far sort of better in the US. Then obviously China is a different story. It's a completely different story. There you have multi-million businesses as well. The checks are very large, but then China, in comparison to Southeast Asia, is again very different. Is a different cup of tea.
Okay, I would like to move on to another topic, and it is the AI and machine learning. You mentioned that in your slides earlier. I would be interested. Can you go a little more into detail? How do you use AI in your matching platform, and how does it, take the matching process to a different level?
Yeah, so what we do, it allows us to scrape the internet, and then we use machine vision to analyze the photographers' portfolios so quicker than anyone else, because our competitors, they focus mainly on the editing of photos, while we focus on the sourcing of the photographers. So that gives us a competitive advantage where we can offer a photo shoot service anywhere in the world, because of sort of the machine vision that we use. That sort of, so anything that you can use a technology, and that's the key word for a lot of VCs as well. They always like the buzzwords of AI and machine vision, and any of those big buzzwords that is very, or deep tech. At the moment, there is a lot of demand for deep tech, sort of, so anything to do with that, you'll find that a lot of VCs are very interested in that.
Okay, and once you pivoted your business idea, was AI something that it was in your vision from the start, or was it something that developed over time?
Yeah, exactly. So that developed over time. So as I said, you keep on pivoting, you keep on changing the product, you keep on, sort of coming up with new ideas. So that is something that only developed over time, where we saw that, how can we source faster, than our competitors? How can we, sort of, sort of also give service, worldwide to make us, to give us that scalability that others don't have.
Okay. All right, and with that, I would like to move on to the chat now. We have one very interesting question from Leo. He asked, how did you manage to balance scaling your business on the one hand and raising your son? And it does sound to me as well like a challenge. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I'm on top of it. I'm a single mom, so it makes it even more challenging. I'd say you have to be very strict with yourself. So you need to put, times aside. So that means first thing in the morning. I don't know. So I get up with him and I sit him down and we read, book together. Then I run into, sort of the office. I work, sort of until 6 normally. And then I go home and spend time with him. And once he's in bed at 8:30, I go back until midnight or 1 a.m. sometimes. So you have to be very consistent with, sort of with, structuring time, but also making time for yourself. So at the end of the day, that's why I said the balance is important, because otherwise you get burnout very quickly, because you spend a lot of hours. So I think for the last 3 years since the business exists, I haven't had a proper holiday, because you're constantly on the mobile, sort of reading emails, getting projects, and so on. So that is the only thing I really miss, to be able to put the mobile away. And like my son says, mommy, don't look at your mobile anymore. So you will find, so you get those type of, comments, and you feel guilty about it, which is good, because you need to look after yourself as well, because otherwise, as I said, the burnout is really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, life work balance, tough topic. I have one question I would like to take a look ahead and ask you what is coming up for Cloud9, for yourself in the next couple of years. Are there any important goals that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think, sort of for us, important goals is obviously, sort of scaling, but also looking at still other pain points, sort of businesses might have. So that's what we're doing right now, just, keep analyzing and pivoting, but yeah, to grow our team, globally, and our platform as well. And I'd say adapt to, sort of new challenges that companies are facing in e-commerce and in sort of in digital marketing.
Okay, and with that, let's look at a second question from the chat. It is, yeah, there we go. Do you have any advice for women in business or for future female founders?
Any advice? I mean, at the end of the day, an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, whether it's sort of a female or a male. I don't think there is a difference as such. It is true that, for example, male entrepreneurs, and that is a statistic, so it's not even sort of said by me. It's true that sort of male entrepreneurs have the capacity. I don't know whether it's to transmit, sort of better. They seem to come across better, and would sometimes say with a lot of bullshit, sort of where they just make a lot of things up, or they're better at selling the idea. While female entrepreneurs, they tend to be a lot more prudent. So I'd say less secure. So yeah, I think what is really important is that female entrepreneurs, they have to come, across as, I can do this, sort of, and stand the ground. I'd say, yeah, and because it's very much in VCs, the majority of the people in VCs are men. In startups, the majority of the entrepreneurs are male as well. So that means you really have to come across as, so very tough, that you're secure, that you feel, secure about your idea, that you hold your ground, when they start, sort of asking you lots of questions which make you feel uncomfortable and so on, but that you have the same demands as, male entrepreneurs, which, sort of they just demand.
Right. Very interesting. We have another question, which I actually wondered myself. What does the name Cloud9 mean, and how did you come up with this name?
Yeah, so the name Cloud9, there isn't an English expression, is to be on Cloud9, and that's how we felt when we finally found, initially when we were finding stock photos that, sort of, that were meeting our requirements. So the English expression is to be on Cloud9, which means, you're really happy, sort of you're all excited. And that is, sort of and I couldn't find the CLOUD, sort of version, so I used the KLAUD, which, sort of looks very German, I realize. But that's the sort of a little bit, sort of the background behind it.
Okay, so I think we actually found another cultural difference, because in German it is Cloud7 and not Cloud9.
Cloud9, exactly.
Yeah. All right. This is actually this question I've been dying to ask you. You have worked in the travel industry for quite some time, and I know COVID-19 has made it very difficult to travel. But once this pandemic is over, do you have any secret travel destinations, maybe a city that you think is very beautiful, but actually no one really talks about it?
Yeah, I'd love to go to Hawaii and to the Maldives. That is, I promised my son that for the next round that I race, I take him to the Maldives.
All right, noted. All right. I think we have one more question in the chat. I would like to ask from David, and he wants to know what are your tips for managing a team throughout different locations and time zones? I know we have established Cloud9 as a very international company. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, I have to say it's very tough. Like I like to sit with people, because you sit across the table, you bounce, ideas, you brainstorm. It's so much more friendly, I would say. What we try to do, because we have someone sitting in Australia, we have someone sitting in Morocco at the moment, we have someone sitting in the UK, in Singapore, here in Spain. So we're all working on different time zones. I think what is important is that you have daily meetings as well, and that you establish, sort of set timings on when to meet, and specifically, obviously in the time zone that, everyone, sort of can overlap at one stage. We use a lot Slack for communication, and Trello, for, sort of dividing tasks and so on. So we work a lot with, sort of applications that make it easier for us then, sort of I would say to monitor, how all the tasks are going and so on. But I think it's, yeah, and then what we do on Slack, for example, is a fun idea, is that every single day one of us asks a question. So we nominate someone else. So, questions can be from, if you had to write a book, what would be the title of it? And then you can only answer with a photo. So you create a little bit of, a fun environment as well, although each of us, is sitting in a different country. But I think that is something that is important, sort of, and yeah, in these times now for, being able not to sit together, for example. So, yeah, find ways in definitely, a lot of communication, meetings, but also make time for something more fun where you share things, or you make, each other, you nominate, your peers in asking the next question, or it can be fun questions.
Okay, and as a quick follow-up, if you put together a team, are there any specific character traits or skills you're looking for? Because you said before, a good team can make or break the business. Do you have any advice on how to put together a great team?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think the most important, if you're a technological company, you need a developer, ideally, sort of on the team, on the founding team, ideally. And then you need sales, sort of sales and marketing person, obviously. So I'd say those would be the two most important, sort of titles, I would say, within the team. And then if you don't have those, then it forces you obviously to, sort of to talk to, or to get other people on board. But ideally the founding team should have like those two or three, sort of team members, because you need customers. So that is sales and marketing, and you need a developer because you're a technological company.
Okay. I know we're closing in on 8 p.m., so I would like to round things up. We have one very famous and beloved question. It is the Think Golden question. And it goes like this. If you could narrow down all your experiences, all your key learnings down to one single tip or advice for us, what would that tip be?
I'd say, it's a marathon, so enjoy the journey. Learn, and enjoy the journey, because you'll be learning so much stuff on your way. That, yeah. So I would say, and don't be afraid to fail, because 90% of startups fail. So it's a matter of, just keep on trying if you really like it. And being entrepreneur is something you normally have in your NDA. So yeah, not in your NDA. That's a non-disclosure agreement. It's the DNA. I think I'm signing too many NDAs. So yeah, definitely enjoy the journey. Sort of, and don't be afraid to fail.
Okay, I think that was a great way to close this off. Thank you so much for your time, Isabel. Yeah, if you're in Mannheim in the next hopefully couple of months, feel free to contact us. yeah, also a big thanks to the people participating in the chat. I think that is it for me. Do you have any closing words for us?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on board. And the only thing I can say, sort of don't be afraid of, sort of trying things out, and just, and a special thanks to David Frankenvilla as well, because he was the one, he actually worked with us. So I was really, it was amazing to have him on board, and actually to get me on board of your event as well. So thanks so much for inviting me along, and I hope sort of that I've been able to give some useful tips to you guys. And yeah, if you have any other questions, please just let me know, and you can message me anytime.
Absolutely. All right, I think that is it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you again, Isabel. And I think we'll see you next Wednesday.